All right, there are plenty of chairs up here if people want. If you want to stand and stretch your legs, I absolutely get it, but let's go ahead and get started for the evening. So welcome to the third and final meeting to discuss and come to attention information about the continuing model and setup for Marlboro School District, and in particular, whether or not to continue the 7th and 8th grade programs here in the district. My name is Scott Kaltenbaugh. I am the moderator and facilitator for tonight. I live in Brattleboro and work there. I'm not involved in the Marlboro School District at all, so I am a neutral party in this. I am merely here to help this conversation go well and to support you all in having the best result for your community and your students. So to give you a quick outline of how things are going to run tonight, what we have asked for is more of a moderated discussion and question and answer session with the board. The goals for tonight, this is really about providing as much information to you, the community, as possible as you head into making your vote and your decision when this comes up on the ballot later. All right? This is about you all creating a shared pool of understanding together so that you all have a community sense of what your concerns, excitements, all of the things that you're feeling about this issue are out there for everybody to know and understand, right? Continued clarity that we are not reaching a decision here tonight. And also the board is not making this decision. You all are, right? And so, wherever you're standing on this, we're not here necessarily to try and convince the board of anything, right? They're going to have their own single votes just as you all are. So you, the community, are making a decision, all right? And by putting all of this out there and bringing all of our thoughts and voices together, hopefully this is setting up your community to create the best possible future for your students, the best possible model for the school district moving forward, no matter what the decision ends up being, all right? So those are the goals that I think we have for this evening. The way it's going to be structured is we're going to do a quick introduction time. I think most people know the board in various ways, but we'll do a quick introduction. Then the bulk will be question time. And this is where I want to make a distinction between comments and questions. You're going to have a chance for both here, right? Questions are what we're going to start with so that we can get all of that information out there. So your question is you're trying to elicit some kind of information from the board, the principal, the superintendent up here. Towards the end, we will have time for comments. This is where you want to share information or feelings or whatever you feel you need to share with the community. So the questions are more directed at these folks. The comments are for the group at large. And we will have time for both, but during the question time, please try and ask questions rather than giving comments at that time. I have sheets of paper or slips of paper back there if you would like to write down your questions so it can be asked anonymously, and then you can bring it up here. We will go through these questions with particular themes, all right? So we're gonna start with the financial questions. I recognize that some of these questions, some of these topics will span some of these themes. That's okay, I tried to categorize them as best as I could. All right, then we'll move on to students and classrooms. School choice, families, transportation, issues of moving kids to other school districts or keeping them here. Staffing issues, and then just that catch-all miscellaneous category for anything that didn't feel like it felt like it belonged anywhere. So as you think about your questions and as you ask them, please try and keep them confined to the time to the block in which we're talking about that topic, and hold those other questions for later. All right? Questions, comments right now, 1, then 2.
Well, I'm just, I know at the end of the last meeting, there were a number of questions that were submitted. I'm just curious whether the board collated answers to those questions.
Yes, we have all of that. I am going to ask many of I've kind of compiled them down, and I will ask many of them to the board for them to they have written answers, but they will also be able to go into a little bit more depth.
Scott, I just want to remind people that we did post that on Front Porch Forum. Maybe not everybody saw it, but there's a link to a PDF. The school website was down for 2 weeks, not our fault. So they will be posted there eventually, but there is a link out there and I can share it, just reach out to me.
It's also posted on the Women's Central website since our website was down. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want more detail, it'll be there, but we will ask some of those questions to the chair. And then there's like.
Thank you, that was my question.
Awesome. All right. So.
Just quickly before we go into questions, speaking of questions for the folks who are at home, there is a funny little square box on the screen, and that is a QR code to be able to post questions online that we will be, Scott will be getting as well throughout the meeting. So folks at home, you can submit your questions via the little link on your screen.
Lots of chairs up here. Please come up for anyone who doesn't want to stand in the back. Lots, 8.
All right. With that in mind, I will be trying to balance questions that have been submitted online, questions that have been submitted in writing, questions from previously asked, and then we'll take some of your questions live. Did you have a question? Yeah. So if we are all ready, can we go through and do some quick introductions for everybody on our panel?
Hi, I'm Bill Antone. I am the superintendent of schools, and Marlboro is one of the 8 communities in which I serve.
Hello everyone, Wayne Kaminsky, the principal of Marlboro School.
Dan MacArthur, School Board.
Douglas Korb, School Board.
Selena Robo, School Board.
Jeremy Kirk, School Board.
Nellie Sarkison, I'm also a school board member.
And I believe you want to do a quick kind of like overview and introduction about, you know, the setup and why this question is.
Well, I think that the board just wanted to remind folks of that first email or announcement that we made. And so I just wanted to read off the first 3 points that were shared in that original communication, just to remember why we're all here and why the board sort of called for this. And the first reason was to clarify the shared education vision of our school and what school structure will best allow MES to achieve our shared educational goals. To make vision-oriented decisions regarding much-needed capital improvements, and provide a safe space for community members who have asked the board to take their middle school student tax dollars outside of the Marlboro School District, and those who hope to do so in the future, an opportunity to have those voices heard. So that's pretty much it. All introductions.
So I'll start with one of the questions submitted here because it's a nice general overview question. I need to understand the costs. What are we looking at to house grades pre-K through 8?
So, I'm sorry, can you repeat that, Scott?
Yeah. So the question is, in order to understand the cost involved, what are we looking at to house grades pre-K through 8?
I think what I'd like to do is, because we handed out a paper at the last meeting which showed the cost of educating 7th and 8th grade here, but it did not show the cost that would be borne to educate the students at other places. So let me just, if it's okay, I'll just read what Wayne put together after that meeting. And I think this is a really important point. What we said before was, as shown in the chart below, and you probably remember there was a bunch of numbers there, the difference between operating pre-K through 6 and pre-K through 8 at Marlboro School is $394,000, 5 full-time equivalent staff. And this is what Wayne put in afterwards. However, the number of students in 2 consecutive grades at Marlboro School averages 18 students, and tuition rates average about $17,850. Given these values, it costs about the same to either tuition out 7th and 8th grade students or educate them at Marlboro School. It is important to note that these figures are estimates and can change drastically with different staffing and student enrollments. So we really wanted to make it clear that the money is approximately the same. So really what we're talking about here is financial philosophy, whatever, but we wanted to really clarify that one item. And does that answer the question? I don't know if it directly addresses the question.
I mean, I think the only other estimate I would add to that, Dan, is we don't include for capital improvements that are pending for any future school that we build or any changes we make. So
Let's do 1 and then 2.
I'll make 2. Can that board be erased up there? Could I ask that what you wrote, what you said, Dan, can be written up there?
I'm happy to do that if it's okay. If you,
Somebody else repeat, can you repeat the question?
I will repeat back questions as people ask them. So the gentleman was asking if the numbers that were just read out could be written on that board. That is being done now. All right, and then the gentleman.
Did you have another question?
No, that was it.
Okay.
There were two there.
So to me, it seems like the real question here when we're talking about finances, going off of what Dan just said, really has nothing to do with whether or not we decide to keep the 7th and 8th grade. Because unless I misunderstood, basically if we keep the 7th and 8th grade, it's going to cost us the same amount of money to educate those students as it would if we got rid of the 7th and 8th grade. So to me, the real question is financially, in my opinion, the school has dug themselves into a financial hole when we're talking about capital investments. I've learned very recently, within the last month or two, that there were some federal and or state funding that the school missed the deadline on because we were waiting to see what was going on with Potash Hill. I don't really understand that thought process because we're talking about essentially, I know nothing's free, but we're talking about essentially free money that we missed a deadline on, knowing that we have so much money that we need to invest in capital improvements. And I'm sitting here feeling like if I did that in my position at my job, I would either be fired or I'd get seriously yelled at. So I'm just wondering, you know, to me, waiting on Potash Hill and what would transpire with that is not an excuse for free money when we're talking about millions of dollars of capital improvements that is now being passed on to taxpayers.
So can I just clarify that your core question here is maybe why was the money, those opportunities missed? And do you know specifically like what, do you all know which grant opportunities those are that you were talking about? Can you clarify which those are?
I don't know the grants.
Okay.
I asked, or when I originally asked this question a month or two ago, I asked just vaguely, has the school board looked into any federal or state aid to help defray some of these capital costs? And that was the answer that I was given was the deadline was missed.
Bill would know better than us, I think, but I will say that, well, from what I know, when we compare Potash Hill, we did engage with architects a while ago. And we've gotten plans that were built for here and plans that were built for just sketches, not major plans. And the difference in costs for renovating here versus moving there were significantly in the millions, for sure. And we're talking like maybe $5 million, I think, because we've got ledge here, we've got the road we want to get away from. So I know that that was a big difference between the two locations. And so that's why it's appealing there, because we're also getting kids off Route 9. So that's a safer option, and the board felt that way, I think, at the time. So that's that answer. And Bill, can you speak to the grants? Because I feel like there's no, Vermont in general isn't giving any alleviation to capital improvements at all in terms of the legislation, right?
So yeah, just to be clear, as the superintendent for 7 years, I am unaware of any federal dollars that would have been available for a project to redo a school at any of the 8 communities I serve federally. And then state-wise, that has been frozen since 2007.
Why?
The legislature decided to do that.
can I jump in there, Bill? I just want to back up what Bill is saying. I also serve on the Vermont School Boards Association, which is it's the statewide group of school boards. They have had a monstrous frustration since 2007 with the lack of ability for any schools, even the one in Burlington, which had to completely tear the entire building down to get any sorts of grants or federal or state aid for it. Just has not existed. And I don't know, I certainly haven't heard of anything that was available that we didn't manage to get hold of. So,
And we're asking too. We asked Emily Long and other legislators if it's coming, and they keep saying no. So
I just wanted
Are they
to know-
doing? Sorry, go ahead.
So you had, so was this perhaps one of the questions, are there state grants for renovation and energy grants? Was that your question? Are there state grants for renovations and energy grants? Is that the kind of question?
Yeah, partially.
Yeah, so in regards to energy grants, there is a large energy grant, and the supervisory union is looking into that and has contacted Vermont Energy to see if they can partner up because of the size and the amount of the grants. It would be able to be tackled in partnership, so they're exploring this possibility. But in terms of defraying costs, it would be about energy rather than renovation.
All right, I'm going to move on to a couple more of these questions so that we're balancing what's being asked live and what's being asked here.
I've been sitting right here raising my hand and you just can't see me, so I'm standing and raising my hand.
All right, we'll ask this question, then we'll move to the online questions.
Okay, so that's great. That's interesting to know what it costs now to educate 7th and 8th grade here versus tuition out. That's interesting. But we're talking about the future of the school. And the future of the school is going to include those capital improvements that are needed. So my question is, if we renovate the school for pre-K through 6, what does that look like financially versus what does it look like for pre-K through grade 8? That's what's important, not just what the cost is now.
So what is
That's the
the
question.
renovation and cost differences between renovating for pre-K through 6 and pre-K through 8? And I will also add, because this question has come up, is there a difference if there's a renovation that does not include pre-K, but does include 7, 8? So we can bring up that, if you can talk about the differences in those costs as well.
So we've talked about all of these options with the architects. The architects that we've engaged in only build schools. That's the reason why we have connected with them, because this is their wheelhouse. They know the insides and outs of what it takes to build a school that has pre-K to 6, pre-K to 8. They've built middle schools, high schools, everything in between, and all around New England. And so we've asked them to look at those those 3 questions, and basically we've gotten pretty vague numbers only because we're in the very beginning stages of asking these questions. And until we really know what we're looking for, they can't really dive in and give us clear numbers, also because costs are rising. Construction materials during COVID went through the roof. So costs are, not exact. But if I recall correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, it was a few $1 million difference to renovate pre-K to 6 versus pre-K to 8 because you need more space. The pre-K specifically, I don't believe was a huge factor in cost difference because they are smaller humans and they take up less space. I don't remember, like, 250 million, or sorry,
Nope,
2.5 million
So
is
what I would
what's
say-
sticking in my head, but
Yeah.
I don't know if that's.
We are currently working with the architect to figure out that exact number. It was about $10 million about 3 years ago to renovate this building. That's what the cost was. That's what we're looking at. As Doug brought up earlier, we were looking at Potash Hill, in particular the library. That was looking at about $6 to $7 million to renovate that for the same school, for the same exact classrooms. So that was 3 years ago. The simple thing is we haven't really gotten a number today in today's world where expenses are higher. We all know that. Labor is harder to get, but we are working on that. The simple thing is, though, if you create a school that has more classrooms, just like if you create a bigger house, it's going to cost more. So we don't know exactly the numbers, but it is going to be in the millions. And just to give a general figure, it's about $50,000 a year for $1 million, and that's about 2.5 cents. If you want to just think about some of those numbers. So
Say the
it's about $50,000 for every $1 million that you borrow per year, and we on average, roughly, this is estimate, for every $20,000 that we spend, it's a penny. So it's about 2.5 cents. So if we're looking at it, $2.5 million, quick numbers tells you about 6 to 7 cents more per year for that renovation.
On your tax rate.
On your tax rate.
You're saying a penny like per thousand.
A penny equals about $20,000.
Right, but I'm saying like per $1,000 of house phone, you pay a penny.
No.
Like on a $100,000 house, what would that extra bill be?
There's a lot of factors in that because it depends upon how much the family makes, and there's the income sensitivity.
And they're millionaires independently and they just own a $100,000 house.
That I can't tell you right now.
I think a simple way to say that is if you say 6 cents, is that where you came out? We currently have a tax rate of $1.91. If you added 6 cents to that, that would be, what, 3% or something like that. So,
Yeah.
and
$6 more cents on top of added to what our tax rate is.
So $1.96, what you're saying.
if we're just using
General
numbers picked
numbers,
out of the air, I don't want to. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there are 3 factors involved here. One is that there's no state money whatsoever. So we've been sort of predicating all of our thinking on the fact that we would eventually be able to buy into a municipal bond the way the state always did it before. The state isn't backing that up for any building renovations, partially because the numbers of students in Vermont continues to drop. Why would they say more new buildings? We have fewer kids. Interest rates have just gone up. So even if we do sell a municipal bond at the state of Vermont level to fund all the buildings in this whole state, the interest rate is not going to be what it was when we were looking at it 2 or 3 years ago. And we don't have more students in Marlboro than, in fact, we have considerably fewer than we've had in the past. So wet blanket here, we may not ever build another building and we might just fix the roof on this one. I just want that to be a kind of a reality check on whether we would ever be able to raise the money to do an expansion at all, or we got what we got.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Wayne? You said 6 or 7 million potentially in 3 years ago dollars at Potash Hill, 10 million. So it's 60% of the cost of whatever it's going to cost. Basically, it's just to conceptualize what that potential could be if we were able to.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Whether the library is still open, whether Potash Hill is still open, but those were the numbers at that time.
I do want to make an important note, which is everybody remember that penalty that people give us if we spend over too much on our equalized pupils. I know we've explained it many times at meetings, but
Explain it one more time, just very quickly.
okay, so
Maybe really loud.
there's a moratorium on that penalty, and that's extended to 2029 because of the pupil weighting that went through and that our board lobbied to enact. But after that moratorium, the state can come and penalize us. Now, one thing we did clarify, and I think it's true, is that any municipal bonds or capital improvement expenditures are not penalized. So that is a different line item in the budget that gets, I guess, erased before that. So you're not going to be penalized for spending to improve your school. You're going to be penalized for what you're spending in the school. Just hopefully that's clear.
I have 2 questions. One of them I think is related to the questions that are being asked, and I don't know if this is an answer that can come tonight. But we've seen a lot of numbers that have come out. And there's also been a lot of discussion around, I think, equity sort of more broadly in the community. And so I would love to understand at least how we get to a look at what the tax impact is going to be across these different scenarios for folks in the Marlboro community of different income levels. So if we have 4 scenarios, one is build, renovate for 7th and 8th, one is renovate for, through 6th, and then we have, not renovating 7th and 8th and not renovating through 6th, or whatever those scenarios are, understanding what the impact of that is going to be on different tax levels within the community would be super helpful, I think, for the whole Marlboro community to be voting and making this decision. So that's one question. If you've got an answer now, that would be lovely.
I think what you're talking about is something Wayne touched on in the last meeting, which is simply, if you choose a different structure, you're going to have the same amount of money that you're spending on that school to either lower the tax rate or expand opportunities for the kids in the K to 6 or the pre-K to 6. That's what you're talking about doing, and that's the board decision, whether it's these people on this board or a future board. So it's really going to be what the town votes on and what the board proposes based on the administration's recommendation at that time of the structure. But your tax rate is something that you will always be looking at, and the spending in the school is something you will always be looking at every vote. So in my opinion, it'll be the choice of the town how that money that's either freed up gets spent or spent gets spent. Does that make sense?
No, I don't think it does. I think the question remains like what you know, there is a vote being put to the town, right, of hey, do we continue the 7th and 8th grade? And I think this goes back to the other question that I had, which is I love the 3 things that you brought up, which were the purpose of these 3 meetings, right, initially, in terms of the vision of the school, where do we want to go, what are we trying to accomplish? I would also love to understand kind of how that content and the information that has been shared from the community is being distilled and factored into this discussion, right? Because at the end of the day, this is all leading to a vote of, I believe, and maybe this can be clarified, of do we continue 7th and 8th grade at the Marlboro school or do we not? And I loved at the first meeting, and I missed the second one because I wasn't here, but I loved at the first meeting that we led out with vision. And I would love to understand how that's being sort of factored into what the actual, ballot is going to be that's before us, and how, what information this community has to be able to, make the decision on that vote.
Can I attempt to summarize that and clarify it for a little bit? So some things that I'm hearing are that, like, one, the community is being asked to vote on keeping the 7th and 8th grade, but right now there aren't a lot of very firm answers on exactly how their particular tax rates at different tax levels will change. Like, what are they going to pay out of pocket? In some cases, because there's not firm estimates on the cost of Potash Hill, what the final cost of renovating for pre-K through 6 versus pre-K through 8 is. So is there maybe a timeline on when that information will be available, and can that happen before the vote happens? And then also the secondary idea of like the discussions that have happened so far in the previous 2, how can those factor into the information being put forth around finances and how this work is going? Is that
So I think what you're asking is what is the average taxes somebody pays for an average house and an average salary in Marlboro? And if we have these 2 different scenarios, what difference would that lead to their tax bill?
Well, no, to be super clear about that, because I really think that this is where, there's been discussion, right, around how we've got the people in this room, and then we have the rest of the community that is not in this room, and who is being represented, and is everyone being represented equitably? And I think it's super important, regardless of, I don't know what this room is made up of in terms of income levels in Marlboro, but to me, it's not about the average income level. It's about how is this impacting at different income brackets, and I don't care how we break that down, the citizens of Marlboro. So what are the how are we making this decision? Right? Because I've lived in a lot of different communities where gentrification and wealthier folks moving in and wanting to spend money on things, right, has created in some cases positive movement, in other cases really negative consequences for that community. So I would love to be, as a community, making this decision as eyes open as possible for how is this impacting the entire community.
Yes. I would say that that's one scenario, probably the average, where we could come up with different scenarios of how much your house is worth and roughly how much that family would make, and then taking into account income sensitivity and what impact that happens. And then looking at the various different budgets that we could come up with for pre-K to 6 and pre-K to 8. We can do that. We've actually done that in the past with our business manager. She has taken the average house household and the average household income. And as you know, when our taxes went up significantly a couple years ago, we were able to see how many dollars that is. So we could come up with a chart, and I think it sounds like a good chart to have of various different scenarios of house and family income and what impacts that'll have based upon different budgets. And I think the one budget that would be helpful is to think about what would a renovation add to our taxes. And because we do have a building that is in dire need of repair. So I think that's something we can do, and the business manager could help us with that.
And if I can just jump in and say something that I also said at the last meeting, that Vermont has an income sensitivity built into the way it assesses education property taxes. On your house and 2 acres, if you earn less than about $115,000 per household, some of your education property tax on the house and 2 acres is paid for by the state. Collectively in the town of Marlboro, about $390,000 comes into people whose household incomes are less than $115,000 to help them pay the taxes. So it partially counteracts the gentrification that you're wondering about.
No, and that's exactly, I think that's a component of the analysis, right, that I want to understand, because it feels like there's two very distinct components of this. One is the vision. Who do we want to be? Where do we want to go? Right, and the other is, and what's that going to cost? And can we afford that? And does that make sense? Those are the two things that we need to be making decisions about, and I want to just make sure that those are clearly laid out.
I do want to say that your question's quite optimistic, because we do also have a housing problem in Marlboro. And that's really the issue, I think, is housing.
If we could, I'm so sorry, I think if I'm just sensing, if we could all just up here speak twice as loud as we think, or if we need to speak, maybe stand up when we speak, because I'm just seeing people all over here leaning forward whenever we
Your
speak.
question supposes that there's going to be an influx of people moving to Marlboro. But the other thing the board has wrestled with is who's going to be moving here and how are they going to live? We've tried to house teachers here and we can't find housing for them because that will entice teachers to come. So it's really difficult. So I don't see, whatever you're envisioning is probably a lot of years out in terms of changeover of houses. I mean, I think we've talked to the lister too, Evan Weiss, and there's been one land transfer in, I don't know, the last year, I think. So it's not.
So we think that's what, I actually don't even think that's what the question's about, to be honest with you. The way I interpreted the question is how is this financial decision going to impact the taxpayers of this town that are not here, which I am here representing, because every year when we used to have town meeting, we expressed community, togetherness. It's not togetherness, because every year the school's budget goes up and up and up and up, and it never seems like anybody cares about the other taxpayers in Marlboro. That I've talked to quite a few of them, and to be perfectly blunt, they don't come to town meeting, they don't vote because they're sick of it, because their voices are not heard.
Okay, thank you for showing your passion there. I do want to make sure that we're kind of wrapping up this question and bringing in some other things so that we can move on to the other topics. It does sound to some degree like there is a strong desire for that grid of tax layouts. Do you have any sense of when that can be provided to the community?
Can I just say, so Andrew, when I was working on some of the things for Act 46, I went through and did a similar process. I worked with the town clerk's office, and I worked with our budget manager, so I can do a similar process because I did all of that 6 years ago when we were having similar conversations around school mergers. So I can help to generate some of that stuff, and we can post prior to when we reconvene again, because we will have to meet again in February, 10 days prior to the vote for a town meeting. So I'll make sure that it's available for folks by that time, if not sooner.
I'm gonna say we probably have time for 3 more questions on finances. I've seen this hand back here, and then 2, and then 3.
So I'd just like to make sure that whatever goes into those figures pertains to, like to know what would go into those figures. Like we've already heard that the cost, tuitioning the students is going to eat up the savings from not having the junior high. So if we're talking about renovations, what renovations are we talking about that are gonna go into those figures? Because we don't have to do the whole school, every renovation at once. No one would do that. So what's the worst thing? Is it the roof? Is it, what is it? So we spread that out over a number of years. We don't have 1 year when everything that is on everybody's wish list for the school should go into the figures for what that's gonna cost for taxes.
So to clarify, is there a timeline or prioritization list of the renovations that have to be done? And if I might add, do the architects have a benefit to grouping some of them? Is there a cost savings to grouping versus spreading them out and lessening the immediate burden on the taxpayers? Is that a fair comment? Yeah.
So just very plainly, I think part of the answer to that is it would really be helpful to the school board and to the town to know what kind of a school we are building in the renovation. But I hear the point, which is very helpful, that there's this other option that we aren't always referring to of if we are staying in this location, then we could do piecemeal renovations and we don't have to think of it as one bond and one big renovation. Is that right? Well, it would help, for me as a school board member, it helps know what kind of school the community wants and what the community is willing to pay for so that we could answer that question. There are ways to still work on the issue before we have that, but that's part of the reason why we're here.
So it sounds like there is, to me, somewhat of a tension between the taxpayers wanting to know what the cost is going to be before voting to approve keeping 7th and 8th or letting go of 7th and 8th. And the board is saying we want, in some ways, we want to know what you all want before we can have those figures for you. And that is something I'm noticing as part of the tension here. Is that fair enough? Yeah.
I also just want to say that as far as capital improvements go, the things that need to happen are not cosmetic. The things that need to happen in this building are things that have been put off for many, many years. We have a leaky roof. We have buckets in our classrooms that are collecting water from leaky roofs. Our septic system is about to fail. We have windows that are 40 years old. I mean, there's a lot of things. So a lot of the things that need to happen are not, we're not getting new paint and new flooring, all the things that we think of beautifying our homes or renovating our kitchen at home. It is more of a functional level to be able to provide a safe and healthy learning environment for our town's children when they're here for 6.5, 7 hours a day, sometimes longer if they're here for after school.
And as we renovate, we are also required to spend, please remind me the figure, but we are required as we renovate to also update things for ADA compliance. So it's not
20
just
cents on the dollar.
Just go ahead.
I believe that's 20 cents on the dollar.
So 20 cents on the dollar. If we want to spend $1, we have to put 20 cents into meeting modern ADA standards. So that not only means that 20 cents per dollar, but it also means the entire design has to also accommodate that, which I hope everyone supports. But that's also a part of why it's complicated. We're talking about renovating this piecemeal. You have to have a large plan, and that plan needs to know exactly what it's going to look like at the end.
All right, we're going to go with this question over here, and then we'll have time for one more that was coming from over here.
This question kind of straddles both the classrooms and the financial, because we are talking about projected budgets for, or with renovations, what the school's going to look like, and we keep saying pre-K through 6 and pre-K through 8. And I'd love to have some clarification about the space issue, because it seems like it is tied with the pre-K coming here, that we didn't seem to have a space issue before there was pre-K, and we had more students at the school, so we have less students now, and yet we're having the space issue. And so I'm just curious that when we keep getting what does it look like with pre-K and 6? What does it look like with pre-K and 8? Why don't we also see what it looks like through K through 8 and what that might be, just given that there are more options for preschool. That chart we got last class, or our last meeting, was only 5 students in the pre-K and many more in 7th and 8th. So I'm just curious if, when we are talking about the finances, we can get either clarification about why we're not also discussing that, or if that could also be included in the projections.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about the space. One of the, before we even had preschool here, the first year I was here, there were 76 students. And the next year after that, we had preschool and it was 93 students. There was space. Actually, the room that we took over was Spanish, and Spanish ended up teaching in that room, the closet. We've also had, so that's how that worked. And then after that, we had a couple years of a little over 100. And then we're back down to 83. The one thing that's changed space the most, though, is going to the middle school model that we have right now. And that middle school model change was really in response to reducing staff. We had 2 teachers in the 7th and 8th grade and 1 teacher in 5, 6. We felt at the time that we needed to reduce that 1 teacher in junior high or move them to be more encompassing to the grades. So we went down to last year 2 teachers for 5, 6, and this year we're 5 through 8, and now we're up again to 3 teachers. Now, if you have 3 teachers, you just need more classrooms. And so the old model of having 2 teachers in the larger room still could work, but we would have to go back to our old junior high model of having 2 teachers in there and 1 5, 6 teacher here. So there's a lot of complicated factors involved in why there's space issues. However, on top of that, we've always had challenges with space. Our art room is in the basement here. Never was meant to be a room. It's very challenging to get down there. We've had a teacher actually break their wrist walking down in the wintertime. This room is utilized, most of the time, and it's really challenging to make sure that art doesn't happen, PE doesn't happen, and music doesn't happen at all at the same time, because even though the space is large, you can't have any of them happening at the same exact time. So that's one of the space challenges that we have as well, too. I mean, if that was a dedicated spot for a music room and it was insulated, that would be really helpful, too. So it's small spaces. When it came to the renovation, the space that came up was really like, well, if we're going to do a renovation, let's have a science lab, because that's what middle schoolers usually have. If you go to any other larger, let's have a science lab. It does not have to be that way, but that's what we had it on it. So we could go with 83 kids now, and we're projected to have 83 students again next year. We could go back to that model, but it would mean that we would be increasing our staffing in the junior high to make that model happen. So that's where it came from.
So we're going to take our one last question on finances. I know people have a lot of concerns here, and I want to remind you that there will be time for comments at the end, so some of those can still be brought up and addressed then. But with an eye on time and wanting to make sure the other areas also get addressed and people's voices get heard, we will take our last question from this lady here.
So some of you remember, I used to sit over there, and I've been hearing about the roof since I got on the board in 1990, so I'm surprised it's still not falling on our heads right now. But I want to piggyback on what Gail said and what Dan said, which is, if we can't get a bond, and we can't get grants, and we don't know what's happening with Potash Hill, and we're just barely coming out of COVID, as you see, some of us don't quite think we're out of COVID yet, what would it take? My question is, what would it actually financially take to do the septic, to do the roof? Maybe we put some plastic over the windows another year or two, and just wait a little longer until we know if the interest rates are going to come down. If maybe something great happens at Potash Hill and houses on that campus become available for housing. It just feels like not doing it now, and that doesn't mean we never do it. It just means like today doesn't feel like the moment to me. And even if we did move out of here, this building exists in this town. Do we want the roof caving in? I don't think we do. We have to think, what do we do with this space if we're not occupying it? So that's kind of what I'm hearing is a tremendous amount of great ideas. I'm on board with most of them, but today doesn't feel like the day to do it.
I will add in one more component to that because it's part of the questions come up, which is also the idea of there's going to be a new principal, and so why are we making this decision now and not with the new principal involved? And so if I might add that to this general question of like, why is this happening now and at this particular timeline, and can we get by on a particular...
And a new superintendent as well.
Yeah.
I just want to respond very briefly, if it's okay, to only the last part of what you just said. Because while I appreciate that it is a part of it all, I think it brings up a new question. And I don't have such a simple response to what you said, but I hear you. But when it comes to the principal, when it comes to our responsibility to hire a principal, we need... It's going to get the best person that we can get. It is significant to ask these applicants to be able to tell them what type of a school they are going to principal. Is that a verb? Can you say to principal? It's a huge deal. It's a huge difference between those two things. And as it has been explained to me, that in education, it's rare to have someone that has both experience educating kindergartners as well as junior high, and to have any knowledge or experience with that, which our current principal happens to have. Maybe we will have another applicant, but it most definitely will affect applicants and our process. So ideally, I would say we would know before we do that what kind of a job we're hiring them for. Or I also hear someone could say, well, we have new leadership coming in, shouldn't we wait to see what their vision is? I just think who that leader is, will be dependent upon what we can tell them about their school coming into. Maybe, but that's something that we're trying to hold with all this.
I do want to diversify viewpoints because I can see this as an opportunity to see with a new principal having creative ideas and coming with the expertise. We don't know, foreclosing on the possibility that applicants won't have the knowledge, won't have the creativity, won't have the willingness, is depriving us of the possibility to explore that. So I can see merit in postponing it, or not taking the time, transitioning through larger historic events like COVID and more local events, and working with a new principal to figure out the possibility of the school.
I just wanted to say that I think that we, as a board and with Wayne, recognize that the best, that the more information we can include in a financial grid, the more of these questions will be answered. What would your taxes look like if we did just fix the roof and the septic? What would it look like if we did make the building compliant with ADA? And what would it look like if we had a science laboratory? So we'll do the best we can, I think, at trying to get that information out. And Selena, you had said, if not before, hopefully before, but certainly by our informational meeting, which is in late February sometime.
So with the understanding that we only have 30 minutes left in this meeting, I need to move us along. There will be time for comments later. I understand that there is a great desire. Also, some of the board members have expressed that they are happy to stay behind for a little while afterwards and continue to answer questions one-on-one for those of you who still have burning financial questions. So moving into the idea of students and classrooms, I'll start by pulling up a couple that have been asked both on paper and in here and putting them together. First is, what information has been, gotten from the students, particularly current 7th and 8th graders, both who are attending, and also who are attending other schools. We have some students here. And then also, what are their thoughts? What have they expressed? And if either of you, not to put you on the spot, if you want to share, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. We actually did put together something.
I love it.
Would you be comfortable coming up and facing everyone? Thank you.
We are Claire and Arabella. I am Arabella, and I am 11 years old in 6th grade. I have moved a lot and now live here. I have a community and I love my school.
My name is Claire, some of you may know, and this is my second year here.
I've got an awesome friend group and I want to be able to have the chance to be at the same school a bit longer with them. I also agree with Arabella. I love the school too and I don't want to leave it.
I've also been here for 2 years. I am obviously going in 7th grade. And I want to know, if you get rid of 7th and 8th, what are you going to do to the current 6th and 7th graders? I have heard talk of getting rid of preschool. And though little kids need childcare, if you go into the school thinking you're going to go from kindergarten to 8th grade, how would you feel if you're told you have to leave earlier? If you had a lot of friends, if you had a lot of friends and had built a community, if you were really happy and you were my age, what would you think of these people who are changing your life in a way you didn't want?
We both think that it's not just about the money, it's also a big decision to decide which school we should go to. Because like I said before, I have basically a perfect life here at this school and I don't want to leave it. I also think that us kids are one of the most people affected by this big decision.
Thank you for listening to us. We may be young, but we and many others think that we should keep the 7th and 8th.
So one thing to also tack on to think about is if you can talk about what some of the other options are, where 7th and 8th graders could go, where some are going right now, things like that.
And before I speak, I just when I opened my computer to make my comments, I noticed that one of our community members is writing to me that they are joining remotely, but their questions are not being addressed, and they find it frustrating. So I'm not sure what's happening. You're taking care of
trying to combine questions
okay.
as much as possible.
Just wanted to make sure that it's brought up. So we did put together a survey for 6th through 10th graders and sent out. Starting the last week before the break. And we heard back from 29 current and former Marlboro students. And we had questions about, what have your experiences been at the school? What were the strengths? What were the weaknesses? And then questions for 6th and 7th graders. If you were to, if you were able to advise the town to keep a 7th grade or, to tuition you out to other schools, what you would do. We asked the same question of all respondents. Would you, advise the town to keep junior high or not? We also asked 9th and 10th graders what their experiences have been at their new schools in terms of transition, how they felt prepared by Marlboro. So 29 people responded, most of them 6th through 8th graders. We had 3 9th graders and 2 10th graders who responded. So out of all respondents, 9 expressed preference for going to other middle schools, 16 expressed preference for keeping junior high at Marlboro, and 2 were not sure. Out of all 6th and 7th graders who responded, 6 said they would prefer to go to other schools, 10 said they would prefer to stay at Marlboro for 7th and 8th. And 9th and 10th graders all felt academically prepared for their new schools. 2 out of 5, because there were 5 as I already said, noted that while they felt academically prepared, it was hard socially because they hadn't been able to make many new friends since they were at the same school for a long time. And one of them, one of the 2 who found it socially difficult, mentioned that at the same time it was refreshing to be around more people and interact and make friends. And all 9th and 10th graders, whether they found it socially easy or not to transition, expressed preference for keeping the 7th grade 8th at Marlboro. And then there are also, narrative comments that I'm sure we're happy to share in terms of what they valued in terms of strengths in their own words, and what they thought were weaknesses, and why they thought we should keep the school, and why they thought that we shouldn't.
Kelly, how many 9th graders?
So 3 9th graders and 2 10th graders.
Okay.
And is there a way that people could, all this go back to that, posted somewhere?
I shared it with board members, right?
But how can we make that? Because that's something that we can make
Yeah, we
public.
can make it public. Yeah.
So those survey results will be shared with the community.
I didn't read those again.
One question that was asked here. Having a K through 8 saved us from having to merge with another school. Will that will changing the model make us vulnerable to forced merging in the future?
Do you mind repeating? I missed the beginning.
Having a K through 8 program helps prevent the Act 46 forced merger with other schools. If we give up the 7th and 8th programs, is the school district then vulnerable in the future to a forced merger?
I think that Act 46 has become a failure, and it's been realized by the state. And there's been unmergers from those forced mergers. People have been voting to split apart because they can prove to the state that there are no savings opportunities, whatever it was that Act 46 was expressed to include. So, one of those was close by. It was Reedsboro and Stanford, or was it
Halifax.
It was Reedsboro, Halifax, and Stanford. All just voted to dissolve. And Bill, you might know of others, but
No, you nailed it.
nailed it.
Was one of the questions that you asked to talk about other possibilities?
Yeah. What are some of the other schools and places that the students can go to in 7th through 8th?
So it would just be an expansion of our 9 through 12 choice. So right now, as in 9th grade, you have the opportunity to choose wherever you would like to go as a student. Students, 65-ish% of our students go to Brattleboro High School. Others go to the Compass School. Others go to Putney School. Some have attended Northfield Mount Herman. Some have attended Burton in the past. There is Leland and Gray, Vermont Academy, Twin Valley.
We did provide a list on the last document that was handed out, so I don't.
Yeah.
If
So I mean,
Karina forgets anything.
there's endless possibilities, really. What happens is that for public schools, the town pays the full dollar amount to cover any public school. That is a state law that if you go to a public school, we have to pay the full tuition amount, regardless of whether it's more or less than the state average. If it's to a private school, then the town pays the state average. And some private schools locally, I know of only Vermont Academy and Compass School, their tuition is the state average.
Is there a chance that this choice will go away for 7th, 8th so that you just go to Brattleboro Memorial High School, like as an example, as this is an option?
That would be a town decision, but that wouldn't be us. Yeah.
We have, well,
No, it would be a town vote.
Yeah.
That would. And it's called a designation. So you would have to designate a 7th and 8th grade that you would attend.
Okay, so on that note, in terms of what you were saying before, like it feels like we're already on this path to making a decision. Like if we want to stop making the decision and say we're going to postpone it, who decides that?
A board has the legal authority to have a vote to place a article on either a special annual meeting or on town meeting that would ask the question, does the town of Marlboro wish to operate a pre-K through 6 school? You wouldn't ask either or, you'd ask one. The opposite would be true. The other option is citizens of the town, 5% of registered voters, could create a petition to ask the exact same question, present that to the board would receive that at a board meeting, and then they would have to act on that. Those are the two mechanisms in which that question would have to be asked to the town. So it doesn't have to happen, but it could happen either way.
Can I clarify that question? I think maybe part of the question is, if we, the town, decided that we wanted to postpone the decision or delay the decision, or is there a mechanism to not vote?
No. You cannot stop a board from having a vote and placing an article in front of the voters.
Unless they decide that they don't want to do it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay.
Right. They decide not to. And you cannot stop the town from getting 5% on a petition and bringing it to the board.
1 minute.
Just very quick clarification from something that was said earlier. There is not currently, you tell me to stand up or to, thank you. There is not currently, we have not currently said we are going to have a vote. That would presumably be at a meeting following this. We said we were going to have these information sessions, these dialogue sessions, and then we would decide, and maybe everyone would vote yes, let's vote. Maybe there would be a majority or minority. I do want to point out that if you were someone who wanted, in essence, to have the effect of postponing the vote, that would, in effect, if I'm understanding it correctly, be equivalent to voting to retain the junior high. And then 3 years later, when all these questions that we have are all easily answered, or then it could happen again. Just like Act 46 brought so much of the town. I wasn't involved in anything, I didn't have any responsibilities at that time, but I was appreciated all the work the town did, the school board did at the time, to kind of codify the town's understanding of what our values are for Act 46. Now we're a few years later, and we're like, wait, how, what of that is still left here? So just a quick reminder that the board said that we did not feel comfortable having 5 people have the responsibility of saying, of parents coming, because this happened, saying, we think our child is best served at this other place. And then we said, who are we? This is my perspective. I would say, I wouldn't want to say, well, who are we to decide what's best for your kids? Whereas certain other school boards are very happy to go, no, we want to keep the money in town. So what we said is, if we said yes to one child, we did not want to come up with some sort of rubric to decide whose children deserve to go to a school that their parents think is better. Not to mention that implies a certain amount of parental involvement that we don't know every student has. So we are saying that's too much power, because what could happen is if we started saying yes to everyone that asked, we would de facto defund the junior high. And then you would have classes with 3 kids in them, and then that might be we might all agree that that's too few kids in a small school. So the idea of giving it to you is to say, tell us what you want. And I would say that regarding the question of postponing a vote, that whether or not the board says we want to vote or we vote to not have a vote, you could still say not yet by voting to keep the junior high, or just the same as doing what Bill said.
But, Jeremy brings up a really good point, and it's one of the points we haven't touched on yet, which is the people that have come and asked to tuition their kids out of the junior high. And I'm just stating the elephant in the room, which is the board knew that if we said yes to this one family, there were 2 other families that were coming right behind them. But there seems to be a trend in Marlboro where people are staying through K to 6, but then they kind of exodus when it gets to the middle school. And now, for whatever reasons and whatever you like to think of, that's happening. And it changes the dynamic of the classroom at that age. And that's what we're seeing.
Nellie had her hand up before.
Okay.
Well, I was gonna say, make Jeremy's point about the fact that we haven't decided to go to a vote. In fact, in our October meeting, we said that we would have these meetings not to take to a vote, but to get the vision, our educational vision, because as board members, we are tasked to make all our decisions that would stem from our shared educational vision, including long-term financial decisions and other kinds of decisions. And I forgot my point, so I don't want to take that.
All right, I'm going to move to some audience questions now, so you've been waiting a while.
So, Lena, you mentioned a lot of different high school options, but I haven't had a kid in school for a while, but I do have a granddaughter coming up pretty soon. So what are the options for middle school? We're talking about junior high, not high. So I know that there are a lot of options for high school, but the only option that I'm aware of for middle school or junior high is BAMS. Are there other options available? I'm just not aware, so that's my question.
So Leland and Twin Valley also operate middle schools.
Oh, they do, okay.
Yes. Compass also operates a middle school. They're a 7 through 12 school. Hilltop, Burton, Stoneleigh Burton.
Nope, not Burton, 9 to 12.
Okay.
Stoneleigh Burton, yes.
I thought Burton was 7th. Stoneleigh Burton?
Stoneleigh 7th grade.
Okay. Both Dummerston and Putney Central Schools. Yep. In Wyndham Southeast. Pioneer, the grammar school in Putney. It's just some of the ones that we have.
So it looks like he's going to be writing those down for everyone. So we'll go 1 and then 2 and then 3.
So I would just love a clarification from somebody that has been on the board for a long time of how long this supposed trend of people leaving to other schools for 7th and 8th grade, is it pre-COVID? Or is it really something that's looking at really what's just been happening in the last few years?
So the question was, how long has the trend of 7th and 8th grade students leaving the district been happening? Is it just during COVID or did it predate COVID? Oh, leaving the school, sorry, yeah.
Dan's got some trend.
So, you know, I have been part of the school for almost 70 years now, and when I was here, there were people who for whom this was not the right place. And that, I think, has been true every year in the intervening decades. So, but fewer people, I mean, to answer your question directly, I don't know that people took their kids out, if you want to put it that way, or chose a different option in the past. But I will say that a small school always has the issue that there are people for whom it's not the right place. As far as now having what Doug referred to as, you know, people saying, okay, that I think is really just a 3-year trend, maybe, right? For people 5 years ago, I think not.
I'm going to disagree with that
Yeah,
because I have, so speaking from my children's standpoint, I have a stepson who is now 25 who came here from junior high. We brought him here from Twin Valley to be in 7th and 8th grade for Marlboro. I have a 21-year-old in college and I have a senior in high school. And each of them, while Scott was the anomaly that came here as from another school, there was other kids in his class that did not return that year. There was, so in my junior in college's class, she lost 3 classmates. My senior in high school, she gained a classmate from a neighboring school district, but she also lost 3. So it varies. I mean, there was kids that, you know, some years nobody leaves, some years 3 leave.
Out of how many?
If I might,
Out of how many?
if I might simplify this, just for time purposes.
Sure.
This feels like data that can be gathered and put online, because like there should be trends. So is that something that the board can commit to doing so that people can see that and have that information? All right.
Well, I mean, anecdotally, like, and I'm not saying that like these people didn't, when I say 3 of Olivia's classmates left, it's not because they moved away from Marlboro. It is because they chose to go to different schools. Willow lost 3 classmates. She actually lost 4. 1 of them moved out of state. So there is a differentiation too between like leaving the community altogether as like a whole family versus choosing to go to a different school.
Okay. We have 14 minutes left for this entire meeting. So with this in mind, I'm going to take 3 more questions. I committed to you 2, and then we'll do 1 over here. And then, so that can include this. It can also include staffing. And then we will take the final few minutes for those comments to everybody. So 1, 2, and then.
In terms of students, there's always, as you know, Dan has been on the school board forever. Every few years, there's a kid who needs to go somewhere else, and sometimes his parents have the ability. A lot of those schools that were mentioned will cost more money to go to, you know. So in terms of deciding, you know, what different schools, both BAMS and Ewan and Gray and Compass, they could go to. I had 2 kids who went through the junior high, and both of them want their opinions to keep the junior high. They are both 27 and 30, and they're really different learners, completely different. Both went to BUHS, were so over-prepared, it was sort of alarming. And the one who's not that big on school
became like, went off the rails in terms of there's just like a candy shop at the UHS. And for me to see that happen at age 12 as opposed to 14 would have been a nightmare, just a nightmare. Both of them, I know my one son he is this great kid. I brought him to Hilltop. He said, no way. I have to go through all the things that happen at MES, and that from the beginning they're thinking about, because they do interactions with all their other grades. And so, like your daughter was talking about, to take away that opportunity to be part of that whole community, and particularly at 6th grade, to hear that they're going to take that away, it's a community. And yes, there are kids that fit in and kids that they maybe need a year off, and certainly during COVID, I would say all bets are off.
Yeah,
in terms of what kids need, they should do.
That is valuable insight from some past students and what you're observing, and I appreciate that.
So
And we
keep
need
the junior high, as my whole family said.
So one, and then our final question.
Can someone please describe for me and other parents, I mean, it doesn't really affect me, my kids are all grown, but for those who are not aware, what is the academic experience like at BAMS? What opportunities do they have that they don't have here? Are there labs? Are they taking Chinese? Are they taking, languages other than English? Is there home economics? Is there workshops? I think people would benefit from understanding what that academic experience is. We know how wonderful the warm and cozy nurturing experience is here, but we don't know what the academics are like to go elsewhere.
And I have I could answer that. Sorry, you can. Sorry.
I was gonna say, so I work in Wyndham Southeast. I've worked in the UHS and BAMS for the last 5 years. So I can tell you exactly what the academics are at BAMS specifically. So what they do is they take all of the incoming 7th graders and they split them into 2 groups. There's 2 teams of students, and each team has a core set of teachers. You have an English, a math, a science, and a social study teacher for each of the teams. And those teachers loop with those students for 7th and 8th grade. So they have the same group of students that they're with for 2 years and the same core group of teachers for 2 years. Those students also take exploratory classes. They take a foreign language exploratory. So they're doing a variety of Spanish, Chinese, French. They do a language exploratory, so to speak. They have woodshop, they have art classes, they have band, they have chorus. They also have access to the ropes course out in the back behind the school. There is they have a health curriculum.
Science?
Yes, there's the science rooms, the science classrooms there all have labs. So they do, there's things that explode, there's things that grow mold, there's things that...
That was one of the comments from the students, is we like something that explodes.
So each of the students all have, they all change classes. They have 50-minute classes throughout the day. So they move to different teachers. So each classroom is, they have a math room, they have an English room, they have a social studies room, then they have their science classroom. And so they move throughout the school throughout the day.
So just brief addition, and then we'll do our last question over here.
So just very.
Can I just ask, what's the size? So there's two groups, what's the size?
So total enrollment in BAMS is about 300. So there's about 150 in 7th grade and 150 in 8th grade, so about 75-ish per team.
So I because we have a teacher from BAMS, I think that's great to clarify that. But what I'm afraid we probably don't have time for tonight or before a potential vote is to come up with an objective pros and cons of all of these options, 2 of which I never heard of before, which I have to figure out why that is. And I'm sorry, but it's on either side here, and it's also printed on that sheet that we said we can give you access to. But many of these schools, the public schools included, but definitely the private schools, they are going to tell you everything that they do really well. Of course, there's more course options at bands. Is that valuable? Is that valuable for the trade-off? So I would just really encourage people that are interested in that to, as a community, because we're not going to be able to do it here, find out what do these different schools offer. They will tell you. In bands, even the public schools, someone will talk to you if you want to know exactly what is the philosophy of the school or how are kids educated. Because I think if we went through each school, there could be pros and cons to each one, and different people have different opinions. But there are parents out there right now just hearing about these things that are already doing this, as some of you may have already done that.
Okay, final question.
Well, I just thank you to the board. I love all of you. And I don't think there's a single person here who I don't like. I think I like everyone. So I just want to say that up front. I was curious about whether the board had the authority to direct all of the 7 through 12 tuitioning exclusively to public schools.
No.
Whose decision is that?
The town.
And so would that be an additional article to something like this coming forward?
That is a designation vote. So you would
But
have
that
to
would
have,
come from the board.
it could come from the board, or it could come from 5% of registered voters creating
So
a
we
petition.
could ask the
and-
board to take that vote, or 5% of us could take that.
That is
correct.
Does that simply be the end of school choice?
No.
You're allowed to designate a
those
Choice
grades.
to a public school.
choice to change the law.
Or, does Compass count for that? Because they meet the standard, or is it only public?
Well, it's a little gray. The board, it is gray on a independent school having to accept designation. A public school has to accept designation.
All right. Thank you, folks. We are moving into the comment time. We only have 5 minutes left in the entire meeting, so I'm going to limit people to 20-second comments at the longest. Just think in terms of like 2 sentences. Remember, this is what you want to say to your fellow community members because you all are the decision makers. These are not necessarily comments directed towards the board, right? So what are some things that you really want to express to your community members about this topic? 20 seconds, 2 sentences each. We'll go as quickly as we can.
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot. Jeremy, to your point, by us voting no on, how do I word this? If we vote, I don't know how you said it. You said something like if we vote to keep the 7th and 8th grade, that's the same thing as delaying a vote. And I don't think it is the same thing because you'll just stop talking about it. If we want you to keep talking about it, but we're just not ready to make a decision now, that there's so much we need to know, there are so many numbers, there's so many things to explore. If we don't have if we need more time to make the decision, that's not the same thing.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you. That is a great comment saying we as a community need more time to make this decision. Right. All right, over there and then over there. So in the back first and then you.
I'd just like to ask people to remember that word vision that was said several times earlier, and that I don't think these meetings have really been able to address. And also that I think we have 7th and 8th grade teachers now who are new to the school and are just sort of getting on their feet, and I'd like to see them have a chance to do that.
I would like to thank the board and Wayne and the superintendent for your time and your thoughts. I think clearly there is a decision that needs to be made by this community, and things have been pushed off for a really long time. And so I'd like you to thank you for the courage to put that in front of us, because that seems really important. I also just want to say that clearly, from my perspective, there are loads of other great options, and that's not the question. I think the question is it important in Marlboro for us to have a pre-K through a community that we are educating in our way and bringing into the world. And I also just want to additionally thank the board for your commitment tonight to provide that additional financial transparency, that sort of matrix view, so that in addition to the sort of vision-based decisions, individuals across this community can be making the right financial decision for them in accordance to that vision. So thank you.
Thank you. Over here and then over here.
Yeah, I just want to go off of that, thanking the board first of all, because I do feel that there's been valuable information, and I don't feel that you all have a direction you're trying to steer us. I'm hoping that obviously at the informational meeting, the wording of the choices on the ballot, I think will be, I'm curious as to that. I think that will be really important.
But just to protect the board a little bit here, they have no choice in the wording of the ballot. The attorney has to check with the Secretary of State to make sure what the legal phrasing is to accomplish the goal of asking the question pre-K 6 or pre-K 8. So just so you all know, they will not be deciding what that looks like. Just wanted to make that clear.
Forrest is our attorney in the back over there.
It's a wild ride.
All right, we'll do 1 and then 2 and then 3. Oh, sorry. No, you're right. Sorry, you were first, sir. I forgot. So 1, 2, 3.
I just wanted to say that I think it's important for us as a community, if in the future we decide to designate a middle school or choose 3 middle schools to designate and get rid of our own 7th and 8th, I think it's important for us not to look down on other school systems beside our own, because at the end of the day, it's the student. When my daughter's old enough, it's up to her. If she applies herself well and does better than, applied herself more than I did in school, she might make something of herself. So if I had applied myself more where I went to school, I don't know, I could have been an astronaut or something, but I didn't, so, I went down a different path. So I think that's important, not to look down on other schools.
Veteran and the head of the fire department, that's all.
Thank you.
Pretty good, pretty good.
I'm gonna encourage everybody, and this applies to myself, I haven't been to many school board meetings. So one of the questions I had tonight, which I didn't get a chance to ask, it probably got asked earlier, is how did we get here? How did this school get to this horrible condition that it's in? Why weren't some of these things addressed sooner? I'm looking at myself saying, I should have been there. I should have been at more of these board meetings. I should have been more involved and been part of these conversations at a much earlier stage. And I know we're all busy. I know when I get home, sometimes my brain is fried. I'm like, the thought of walking back out the door and going and doing something else is like, I can't. But select board meetings, school board meetings, we all need to be involved. And that's a big part of how we, are aware of things and help influence things. So yeah, I plan to do a better job of showing up.
Final 2 comments. This one, and then you'll be the last one.
Yeah, school board attending the meetings is awesome. If you ever go to them, the budget meeting is like 3 hours long, but you go there and you're like, this is not an unsolvable problem. These numbers, we can work with this. It's none of these problems. If you try nothing's gonna work. And there is such a value in community, and you guys live in this little gem uptown in Vermont, and probably lots of you have been elsewhere. I've lived in 6 different states, and this is the best place in the world. I firmly believe that. And I want my kids to live with their neighbors. My sons went to Hilltop because my husband was teaching there. And it's my daughters are going here. And this is such a precious thing that I just don't want to see it lost. I just
Final comment, no pressure.
I just want to say, as a soon-to-be voter in March, I don't feel prepared at all to make up my mind. And partly it's the numbers, which I know you guys are going to figure out. The other part of it for me, though, is I just don't have a good, because my son is a grown-up. He's 37. He's a long time since he's been in school. He went to school in Newfane, not here. I still have the questions about the value of those schools that are on the board. What can they bring to the 7th and 8th grade students versus what we can bring? And for me, that's a big unknown, and I sort of feel like there's a vacuum of information that's going to make it make it a difficult vote. So I just wanted to say that since you asked us to tell our
fellow members how we feel about things. That's how I feel.
Scott, before you take us out, if I could just acknowledge that those of us who are board members are elected officials. We deserve anything, criticism, questions, whatever, but there are also people here that are public servants and people who have done a very hard job. And the first thing is I wanted to just thank you all for these well-attended meetings. People are joining us online. Thank you all so much for coming and for your passion. And we can do more of these things in another form in the future, but thank you all for coming, so thank you. Yeah. And I want to thank Wayne, who is our principal and has shouldered a lot of all of this, and the board kind of gets credit or maybe blame, but Wayne's always working to educate us all. Here, and does this in a lot of different schools, so his evenings are never at home. I don't know how you do what you do, but I would love to just be your student for a year. So thank you so much, Scott, for
helping. Last quick question. So a reminder before we wrap. So go ahead, and then I'll have some reminders before we wrap.
Is this being recorded?
It is recorded.
And can it be shared so that we can ask?
Yeah, BCTV gets us the link about 2 days after the meeting, and I post it to Front Porch Forum. And you can also write the board, and we'll share the link to you however you can get it. But we'll post it on the website. There's already the last 2 meetings on the website, and we'll post the third one there too.
So, thank you very much for those practical questions. I want to just take a moment to thank you all very much. These are challenging meetings. I have enjoyed being at all 3 of them and watching your passion and your dedication to your students and your youth and your community. I would encourage you, stay in contact with the board, right? Keep sharing your ideas, keep sharing your questions, right? This isn't the end of the discussion, right? And a reminder again and again and again, as I've tried to say at all these meetings, this isn't one group versus the other. This is you all versus this challenge. So thank you all. Have a great evening.